Okay, calling to order the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting of October 2nd, 2023. We have a forum, and I would like to start off with an approval of the meeting summary. Abby.
And I would like to make a friendly amendment for some corrections to it, and then I will second to move to approve it.
Okay, as soon as we have a motion, then
Moved.
Okay.
there's the
I
motion.
will move. I will make a friendly amendment with some correction, I guess. Do I have the floor?
Sure.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
So first of all, I just want to say the notes are getting much better, and I really appreciate that to whoever is taking that. I'm very excited. Awesome. Just a couple of corrections. Up. So where the notes are at the bottom of, I guess that's page 5. The second or the last sentence of that paragraph says Executive Director Farhad Mangimi reminded the members that the proposal was developed by a non-official subgroup of the members. And I wanted to amend that after that, co-chair Carolyn Campbell added that that was actually the plan that we had approved in a June meeting, 18-6. That was from the notes from my notes from last time. And then my other correction is the last paragraph of notes that says transit working group representatives from Sarita and Marana expressed concern about increasing the neighborhood circulators. My notes say that Sean Brown and Chuck Dorr both expressed interest in continued transit access in the suburbs, but I didn't get any notes about neighborhood circulators. And Sean Brown particularly mentioned high capacity transit and long distance routes. Those are my corrections.
Everybody hear those? All right. We have a second.
And I'll accept that in the motion, provided we also change Dale's name to his real name. It's Dal under number 2, and I think Sean Brown is name on the members present.
So, Mr. Chair, just a correction, the revisions that were provided by Caroline Lilly, revisions that were provided by the group, what was that on?
I think too, talking about the
I'm sorry,
alternative.
my note is just a correction to the minutes, because what happened in the minutes after you made that statement, Mr. Gini, was that Carolyn made the statement that that was not an ultimate plan, it was the plan that was accepted by this group, was moved by this group in an 18-6 vote in June. And that is absent from these minutes, and we can argue about what that means, but that did happen at that meeting.
Okay, moved and amended, seconded by Dale. Any further discussion?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe, I think what was approved in the June meeting was the project's dollars based upon 0.6 of a cent increase. And that was rejected, so I don't think we have an approved cluster project. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think the point is that we voted on it.
Well, we voted on something that didn't, that RTA rejected. So it seems to me, if we're gonna do this, we have to do it again. I mean,
So if I may, my amendment just for the minutes is just for the minutes. It's not another, we can have that conversation. And we did have that conversation, I think, 2 meetings ago, the one you're bringing up now. But I'm just looking at my notes from the minutes from last time. And I think that that's an important distinction that's on there. And if we need to have that conversation further.
And let's go ahead and get this out of the way so we can dive into our meeting. But any further comments? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, any abstentions?
Justine Hernandez, I wasn't present, so I will abstain.
All right, thank you, Justine.
And this is Moss. I'll also abstain because I wasn't here last time.
Okay,
And this is Debbie Wainwright. I'm also abstaining.
Debbie, you said you're also abstaining?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
I wasn't here.
Got it. All right, motion passed. Move on to item number 3. And I would ask staff if there are any submitted public comments. Okay. On this item, I will note that I've been asked if we could come back to kind of where we were before COVID, I guess, which was to allow public comments and for people to call in with public comments during that public comment period of our meeting. And I'm pursuing that to see if that might be possible for this committee as well. All right, item number 4 is our standing item for development of the RTA Next plan. I'll remind people that at our last several meetings, actually, we've been discussing the transit element. We also, at our last meeting, began the conversation about the multimodal corridor element, and staff developed a couple of tools for us to use in identifying the projects to move forward in our plan, as well as ranking those for even future and further cuts should they be required. We also had a conversation about the new cost estimates that had been finalized and vetted with 2 jurisdictions. So we know that just to get down to the 1.1 billion of the preliminary breakdown of the elements required us to drop 300 some million dollars from the list, or at least to move them to a reserve list or some other method of moving those projects at least into conversations with the board.
About 360 million.
360, thank you. Additionally, as you know, the proposal that we've been working with, should we stick with the breakdown that was on the table at our June 26th meeting, we will have even further cutting necessary or further bolstering of the reserve group, if you will, that we'll have to work on as well. And that's one of the reasons that we're working on this ranking exercise. I'll tell you that as of today, we've gotten 19 of our 29 members to provide feedback on the selection exercise, and only 15 to provide their feedback on the ranking exercise. I think it's so important that we get this, as close to a consensus as we can, and try to get as many of our members to participate as is at all possible. That I'm going to leave the 2 portals open until Friday, and I'd ask for anyone who hasn't had a chance to do it, and if they need help, please reach out. And staff is more than eager to help you figure out how to manipulate and use the use those two tools. So when that is completed, then staff will put together the results of it, and we'll ask the TMC to also take a look at that and give us some further feedback as we review it at our next meeting. Arlen, do you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment on that. I'm one of the ones that had to reach out because I'm technologically challenged. So I was able to do the first part of the exercise, and you said that there was a difference, and I could not figure out how to make the second part work. So I called Rick, who put me in touch with Peter, the IT guy. I'm not sure what his title is. And very, very, very helpful. And so I appreciate that tremendously because I was stuck and I don't know what I did wrong, but I did something wrong. So, yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mary.
thank you. I wanted to emphasize, it's such an important piece for all of us to go through. And for the people who haven't gone through, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that it was complicated. And I'm a tech person, and I had to really think about what I was doing, and I had to come back at it a second time. I think it would be really worthwhile to take 10 minutes today for someone to bring it up on the screen and walk through the process, because we should have 100% of our people responding to this. Everybody who's had a voice over the past 5 years or 2 years, however many years you've been with us, if you have a voice, then you really need to use that voice in getting this initial or prioritization of these down. Otherwise, you don't have a voice, and we need everybody's voice. So I don't know if we have time, Mr. Chair, but I think it would make a big difference if someone could just bring it up on the screen, walk through what the elements are that need to be done, so that there's nobody out there that says, it was just too complicated for me to figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Brad, do we have the capability of?
We'll
pulling
see
that
if
up?
we can contact Peter, and later on, as soon as we get them set up, maybe we can do that. But
Okay.
we'll have to talk to Peter about that.
Thank you. All right, Abby.
Just one real quick tech piece of advice on that. It worked for me when I maximized the screen. So if people are having problems with the dragging thing, if you maximize your window that you're looking at, it makes it easier. So that
Yeah,
might be
the
an
only
issue.
problem with that is that if you, you mean move the, maximize the.
If you have multiple windows up and they're not maximized,
Gotcha.
then you can't do the drag and drop. But if you maximize it for your whole screen, then you can do it. That was, for me, that was my experience. So
Yeah, I think another thing I learned was that I really needed to reduce the overall screen to about 80% in order to see the buttons at the bottom.
that's the opposite of my experience. So tech people would be helpful.
There we go. Yes. So I look forward to some assistance from Peter. Go ahead.
And
Dave.
I'll just throw out the other thing that I found key, I got through it too, but was to make sure that you went to the project number and clicked on the project number, and then that you could drag much easier once you, where you were there. If you were trying to drag it from just anywhere in the project,
Didn't work.
it didn't work.
Right. Everybody understand that? I think if you got through the exercise, you ultimately figured it out somehow. If you didn't, you've got a couple more days this week. Please do it. I just think it'll be much more helpful for us to be able to say that our group as a whole ranked these projects in this way. Okay. One last thing. Later in our meeting, as you recall, at our last meeting, there was a brief conversation about the fact that the city of Tucson was working out some ways of looking at the plan that were holistic as was the description that they provided. I indicated at that time that once that had been presented to the mayor and council and we knew more about it, that we would have a chance then to learn about it ourselves. Although I will remind you that the proposal from the city within its own organization is not at this point a TMC or an RTA change of any kind to the plan or the formatting of the plan. It's simply a proposal that we will get to hear about from the Department of Transportation and Mobility Director Sam Credio in about an hour or so. Okay. All right. Today, I'd like us to dive into items C, D, and E that you see here, which are the safety element, active transportation, environmental elements. So let's kick this off with the safety element. We know from the proposal from our colleagues that this safety element is 160 million is the proposal. And there are a few changes, as I recall, to exactly how those would be broken out. Carolyn or Moss or anyone else that would like to walk us through that? Crickets.
No, well, I think trying to be polite to each other, but just a acknowledgement that two, I think, city projects got moved from the name projects. They're named projects now in the safety, the 3656 and 3664. Well, okay, good. And so that was a total of 95 million. So, that I think that was also part of the TMC. I mean, the city did that at a TMC. So we are reflecting that. Anyway, that's reflected in the safety. So then the rest of it, 65 million, is for, I mean, that's the only, I guess, discretionary part of it now, because those projects got moved over to safety. Then
So one of the things we have to address here is that we have in the proposal from the group, let's just call it the June 26th proposal. We have a different breakdown that's proposed than the allocations and the sub elements that are shown here. I think it'd be helpful to let the let the committee understand what those changes are. From my notes, that speed management is one sub element, and corridor and intersection safety improvements is the other. So those are two large numbers, 65 and 95 million each. How does that fit with what we have here? Bus pullouts were moved to transit.
right, bus pullouts were moved to transit. So the total on the June 26th approval was 160. million and the TMC is 150 million. So I think it could be, I mean, I think that's up to the group in terms of how we want to break it out for 160 million with, of course, those two projects. And we also had the corridor and intersection safety improvements lumped in on that 95 million. And that's 24.6, it looks like, million. So I mean, it's basically on the proposal in both, except the transit corridor bus pullouts are now in the corridor project area, the 10 million. So other than that, I think it would be up to the committee to talk about how the rest of it should be divvied up and if there are any proposals on that. Because we just had it lumped.
Okay, let me ask Farhad, there's a couple of notes indicated here that don't show up, but the technology upgrades. Do you recall what was the?
Sure, yeah, Mr. Chair, if you
was in
recall,
that?
there was extensive discussion about what's eligible, what's not eligible under technology upgrades. So the footnote really kind of stressed the fact that there may be items that are not eligible. So just kind of highlighting that fact. And then the one for the bus pullouts, you already talked about that there was discussion that it could go to transit instead of safety. So those were the footnotes.
So what we're seeing here from that original allocation and if you will, the TMC modifications that we agreed with here of moving La Cholla and 22nd into safety and active
Right.
transportation means that we're at 140 million there. 160 has been proposed. So the question to the committee is, shall we stick with the elements that we see here and make those come out to 160 or to 140? And or is there any change that we feel is necessary?
I mean, keep them proportionally the same.
Potentially, that's
Right.
one option, I suppose.
Well, let me ask Farhad about the technology upgrades. Then can you remind us what is and what isn't eligible? Because the note isn't there and I can't
Yeah,
remember.
so again, at the time, the conversation was, for example, fiber optics. So fiber optics, if it's used as a utility, it's not eligible. RTA does not pay for utility improvements or upgrades. But if fiber optics is used as a connection to a system, then it's not really a utility per se, it's part of the system. So it just depends. So we have to look at those in case by case scenario. But in general, what we're using currently is upgrading signal technology, and those are eligible.
And another question then, because we've talked a lot about technology in our committee. I don't know if Bruce is on in the meeting today, but I know he has. But a question I have is for technology upgrades, would that just be for the corridors or would it apply to transit too if there are new, really super cool things to, that I think we're doing it anyway about having the next train coming or next bus coming and, the wireless on the buses, that might already be done, but could this money be applied to transit element?
Yes, so the definition of operation, that's what operation versus enhancement. I mean, if you recall, RTA's mission is to enhance and provide opportunities to supplement, and in this case, technology would be an enhancement. So those would be eligible, but if it's just an operational routine element, then those would not be eligible.
Got it. Oops.
Abby?
These numbers don't mean anything to me in a vacuum. And so I'm wondering if anybody at PAG staff or anyone else knows, like, how much money do we need for safety in similar question to what I asked Sunshine folks at our last meeting. If we had a limitless budget, how much would it cost to actually do this? And I want to make this not so sky high level. Last week we had a car accident on the newly wide, car crash on the newly wide grant that split another vehicle in half when a vehicle was going 130 on grant. And that's a newly improved road area. So when we're talking about safety, what are we talking about? Reality on the ground. How much money do we really need? And how do our competing interests in things like road widenings work with this? Because to my mind, it shouldn't have been physically possible for a vehicle to hit speeds like that on Grant. And all of the fiber optic cables, signaling lights and everything like that in the world didn't stop the vehicle from going that fast. So how much money do we really need? And where else are we looking at safety when we're looking at like road improvements?
So,
They're very broad questions, but
Mr. Chair, if you recall, we had that conversation and discussed each element based on the long-range plan. As a whole, the long-range plan identifies nearly $32 billion worth of needs. And the revenues that are available are closer to $15 billion. That's the overall long-range plan exercise.
how does that 32 billion for safety?
Total long-range plan for
Okay.
all transportation needs. But if you recall, we went through this exercise with each element. We demonstrated each sub-element, how much is in the RMAP as far as identified need within the fiscal constraint. That information was in previous packets. We'll be happy to send it out again. But that's where these allocations came from, to be responsive to those needs as much as possible. For example, off the top of my head, the intersection safety and capacity, I believe that only meets less than 40% of the needs in the RMAP. With the bus pullouts, we had about $20 million identified. That meets about 50% of that. With railroad crossings, we identified $10 million currently, but we know that's not sufficient for all of our needs. Technology, I believe it was about $60 million, and 40 million meets about 2/3 of that. So again, none of these are intended to fully be able to meet all those needs, but they're intended to at least address what we can through the RTA process.
That was my exact question, so I'll look through.
It's how much money we have or how much we want to dedicate.
Okay. Dale, go
I'd
ahead.
like to address one of your comments, Abby. And I know the wider street gives people, maybe they thought that they can go faster. My brother-in-law was a Tucson police officer for 31 years. And he explained how in one instance he was doing 95 miles an hour on a county dirt road chasing a suspect. So where people are motivated to go fast, it doesn't really matter if they don't care about people's life, other people's lives, other people's concerns. You know, and I think this case where this particular instance, this guy was doing 130 miles an hour on the freeway. And then he's doing 130 miles an hour on, he's not doing that without breaking multiple laws and endangering everybody else on the roadway. And it just happened he happened to hit that car. It's inexcusable. I understand that the concept that it was 6 lanes is probably, but if it was 4 lanes, I doubt that it would have made a difference. He would have probably still been doing. And that I think goes with the psychology of the person doing it, and the fact that they were drunk out of their mind at triple the intoxication level. So I think those are wild cards that really doesn't add a lot. I mean, the only saving grace in this would be if you could take the guy's car away from him completely. And that's about as likely to happen as gun control, unfortunately.
Thanks, Dale. Comment from Mel?
Yes, thank you. And I apologize, but I don't have a clear understanding on the 65 million for the safety and capacity improvements for the intersections. Can you give me a high level review of that versus what the technology does?
It'd be a Rick question. You want to give an example of what type of project?
So a technology project would be based on the focusing on just the equipment pieces of it, and the existing geometry, configuration, layout would not be changed. So we're basically saying that for technology can take it to the next level because all the other infrastructure is adequate. For the intersection safety capacity improvements, that's looking at more the capital side. Do we have the proper appurtenances, turn lanes, configuration? Would a roundabout be more appropriate, or some other variation on that? So you're actually going to change the physical geometry and configuration of it. Mel, does that answer your question?
That's a great start. So, and for the intersections, have we identified the actual intersections that we're looking at, or that's a decision made later?
That's typically a decision made later. So that's done as we, the jurisdictions would bring candidate opportunities. I think on the current plan, we had identified examples such as, and it had highlighted a couple of the most critical ones, just to kind of prime the pump on that. But I believe the intent is that that's then as guidance for the jurisdictions to work with and see what their most prevalent and pressing needs are.
And one more question, would the intersection safety be something that would include what the city did at 22nd and Keno as a multi-level, intersection?
So to my knowledge, there's not restrictions on the type or configuration. That would obviously have to be balanced against cost. And also, I think as it works its way through the committee structure, ultimately then to the board for approval, there's got to make sure that there's the emphasis on the safety component. Safety and capacity and congestion relief are all intertwined, but making sure that the driving factor is going to improve the safety. And if the others can come along, that's fine. So to have a specific configuration would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, Mel, an example of capacity improvement may be adding a right turn lane or adding a second left turn lane, or widening some portion of the utility lane. Those are different things that would be more of, I think the idea of these has always been kind of spot improvements. These are improvements that occur simply at an intersection to deal with an issue, whatever that issue might be at the intersection. We also know that capacity of roadways is typically determined by the capacity at the intersection. If you have free-flowing traffic, you can get a lot of vehicles moving on a stretch of roadway that has no signals or no conflicts, if you will. However, once you get to the intersection, obviously half the time people are stopped if it's a signalized intersection. So you lose that throughput. The safety issue is really what this element, I think, is about. At least all of our conversations before this have been about that. You look even at the at-grade railroad safety sub-element, it's simply about cars getting hit and people getting hit by trains because of either lack of grade separation or other safety related issues at the actual crossing.
If I could, Mr. Chair, in presenting this to the public, that 65 million, do we have a sense as to how many intersections that would treat? I'm just thinking about how we present this ultimately for approval.
Here, if you recall, as part of that conversation, we brought up typical treatments and costs varying anywhere from $500,000 to a $5 million range based on the type of projects. So the communication with the public would ultimately be along those lines, that improvements to intersections as needed will be identified, and we project based on what the final number is, how many intersections potentially could be treated and improved. And that's what we did last time as well.
Yeah.
Kind of gives a target number that we think is reasonable, say between 10 and 20 for this type of allocation that would be then able to be pursued. One thing to add to Tom's explanation, because I can anticipate the question, even though an intersection safety issue may be driven by a lot of the vehicular complications, that's not our only focus. When we get in there from a delivery standpoint, we then make sure we're trying to accommodate all the other modes as well. So there may need to be pedestrian upgrades, bike upgrades as well, transit pullout. So it's a very holistic look, even if something isolated is driving it to cause that look.
Just,
Go ahead, Carolyn, and then Eva, Moss and Bruce with their hands up.
yeah, I just wanted to clarify what I assume is that this is a pot of money for those that haven't been identified yet, but in the corridor projects, if there's a need on those corridor projects, it's included as part of the project.
That's correct. We've included that in there. So if there's a hot spot on a corridor, our efforts with the jurisdictions have already built that into that corridor improvement. So it may need special attention above and beyond.
So Mel, that was for you, because there are a lot of the corridor named projects, and I would assume there's quite a few of them that have intersection improvements included. So that's not what this money is for. This is for the.
This is standalone to go outside of your roadway network system. So that project stuff, you're saying I'm going to these 33 corridors. Now where can I go into the other parts of my network and tackle those? This provides that resource to the jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think also it would be helpful for us to go back and review the information that Farhad was talking about, that we've seen at least once or twice in the past year. But I think I'll ask if that can be sent back out to us, and we'll take a look at it, so that at our next meeting, I would expect that we will we'll decide on how much allocation total here, as well as within each of the safety sub elements that are listed. Okay, Eva.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to return for a minute to the conversation that I believe Abby and Dale were having about speed and this incident that recently happened with really excessive speeds. And while, that is kind of maybe an outlier incident, I think it's really interesting that we're having a conversation about identifying speed issues. I think it's really essential. We lost the spouse of a colleague when I worked at the Tucson Jewish Community Center, because you come around that bend, it's kind of like open and a flat area, and people just increase speed, and they come around a curve at the same time, and they don't see the light fast enough, as well as they're accelerating well over the speed limit. We advocated to at least have some extra signage put in, but this is something that the U.S. Department of Transportation has identified as an issue, right? The geometry of the roadway, the characteristics of the roadway, such as open flat areas, can encourage higher speeds. So I think it's really important that we discuss seriously, when it comes to safety, that the design of our roads does have an impact. on what speeds are kept. Take, for example, Barraza Aviation Parkway. That's a brand new project. Speed limit there is 35. I never see people doing 35 there. They're well over 35 because of the way the road goes up, and drivers have this very expansive view. It seems like it's a very open area, and it just signals people to speed. So we haven't had this conversation before. I believe it's a really important conversation. How are we considering these things in our project design?
Ava, you do bring up a good point that I think a lot of us in the profession wrestle with. And at the end of the day, we have asphalt, concrete, and steel to offset human behavior. So there is that fact of reality to it. I know there are various groups that are working at national levels to identify where some of that can be tightened up and where those geometric standards that we operate within can be less forgiving. A roadway doesn't encourage somebody, I mean, somebody's going to willfully have to break a law to speed or to drive in excess. So the roadway is designed in a safe manner. If people feel that they can do it comfortably, that's what we're looking at.
I disagree. I disagree that people are willfully breaking the law when they speed. I think that there are certain visual cues that cause people to accelerate, and before they know it, oh, they look down and they realize that they're well over the speed limit. So I don't necessarily think that it is every driver who's over the speed limit because of the design of the road is necessarily willfully breaking the law. There's certain visual cues that are causing them to accelerate more because it seems appropriate for the context. I just want to, there is a great debate there between, how much of the responsibility is on the road design and how much of the responsibility is on law enforcement and how much of the responsibility is on the driver.
And you do bring up a good distinction. That is a very good point on that. And I can tell you it's being looked at. I think that's generally way into the weeds of the design elements, the jurisdictional standards, and then rooted in the national standards. That's kind of more into the weeds and roots of the delivery efforts on this, more than just project selection.
Thank you. Amos.
Thanks, Tom. Just want to second everything that Ava said, and I don't think it's even a matter of opinion or belief. It's been pretty well researched that everything Ava's describing as far as behavior unintentionally the design of the roads shapes how people speed. And that's kind of a known standard accepted fact, I think, at this point in the industry, which is why we have complete street concepts and all these other new design methods, because and we can all feel it ourselves, right? You drive in a city on a narrow area, you're naturally going smaller because you're worried about hitting your car on either end. You're not going to go through a tight space, at 40 miles an hour. You're going to go much slower to ensure that you're not hitting anything. And so you can actually see how you can be influenced by the space that is on a right of way. Conversely, I mean, I've noticed myself personally where I'm driving down Broadway or 22nd Street or, any of our major thoroughfares where we have a lot of excess space, and I can feel my speed creeping up, and I really have to monitor it just because there's nothing there to signal to me to be slower. And that's why, there's been plenty of behavioral research that points to this. So I guess, so I just want to really, back up folks' concerns on that front, that it's not just intentional, negligence of the law or, ignoring of the law. It is by design flawed. And then secondly, and I'm sorry, Tom, if you explained this clearly earlier, but I just missed it. That I'm just a little confused about what we're looking at here. It seems like this is really an outdated set of numbers for our group to be working from. I'm worried like we're going to be rehashing conversations we've already discussed months ago. We've discussed that capacity improvements probably don't belong here for all the reasons that we're discussing. We've discussed that the bus pullouts don't belong here because that has absolutely nothing to do with safety. It's just about moving vehicles through an intersection more quickly. So I'm just kind of, and I think I'm also just thrown by the missing piece of the June 26 proposal here for comparison. So could you just recap the purpose and how we're going to kind of build on stuff rather than rehashing things we've already discussed in previous meetings?
Yeah, we're going to decide if we want to completely change this framework that you see here for safety element into two items, speed management and corridor and intersection safety improvements. What was on the June 26th proposal was $65 million for speed management. The description was that projects that reconstruct facilities to align the design with designated speed limits and surrounding land uses to improve safety. That was speed management.
And mobility.
And mobility, okay. And for the corridor and intersection safety improvements portion, the description was projects that make safety improvements to corridors and or intersections to improve safety and mobility. Can use funds for two named projects, that being La Jolla and 22nd Street projects. So questions have come up in this conversation. I apologize that we don't have the right
Slide.
visual for us to look at here, but the questions have come up about what exactly is the need within each of these. And so I think it's helpful for us to go back and remind ourselves what those were. Those obviously led us to kind of stay in the same general vicinity with our safety element overall. But how we want to present that to the board and to the public is really what I think is the important conversation right now. Besides, if we present it as these elements, sub-elements that we've been looking at for several years, how would we modify those numbers, and or would we? And then if not, then are we good with the description and the totals that are shown?
Okay.
Further that.
Sorry, go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, Maz, I don't know if you're on yet, but the kind of the question that was posed there is, do we want to use these categories from the last time, or at least from what's been proposed and adopted by the TMC, and then which would be 140 million for us because the transit corridor bus pullouts were moved, and then we have 165 million in the June 26th proposal. Do we just want to increase proportionally the same categories, or do we want to go with the two categories that we had suggestion and approved on June 26th, or something totally different? And so that's kind of where we are right now. This is the only slide we have up, is that RTA next allocation as per TMC. And there haven't been any motions to do anything with our 100 and how we want to parse it out. And I guess I would ask Farhad, with those two kind of broader categories that we had, do you think that that Tom just laid out, would that be something that would go on the ballot and be understandable enough? For apparently you'd rather see these categories. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you land on the description of each sub-elements, and then help you at that point to make sure that it hopefully is understandable and eligible. So we had that conversation before. Anything that's operational obviously would not be eligible. So we want to be careful that we're not talking operational items. Anything that is a capital improvement, anything that's an enhancement, then those would be eligible. So we'll, once you decide where you want to land on the sub elements, we can provide more details for you.
And sorry, Boswell, and one last question, because that speed management, I think we talked about this before, that this first item, the 65 million for intersection safety and capacity improvements is just for intersections. We talked about things like the hawk lights and the different kind of things in mid corridor. Where would that?
Currently, we're using the technology upgrade
Okay.
for those hawk crossings.
That's really helpful, both of you. Thank you. So I guess, is there like a way that we could have, I don't know, like a table or something where we as a group can start to kind of fiddle with wording here? You know, like to me, if we're wanting to move forward on this, getting rid of capacity in that first sub element, you know, if we're trying to like find a balance point between the June 26th and this, I'm just wondering, can we have some kind of like, I don't know, blank sheet of paper or spreadsheet get pulled up so we can kind of wordsmith as a group? Or is that an okay path? Like I would propose doing something like intersection safety and intersection and corridor safety improvements. And then, you know, we could remove the bus pullouts and just show that so that we can all kind of visually track what we're talking about as a group about where we want this to land.
Yeah, I would like to do that. My concern, a couple of concerns. One, we don't have, people don't remember or either weren't participating at the time when the description of the needs, which were organized around the safety elements that are showing on the screen now. And so converting those needs to the two very broad categories that are in our proposal is, I think, going to be a challenge. I hate to see us not include technology upgrades and railroad safety in our sub elements. And I guess that's part of the reason that I wanted us to look at this and kind of compare them. Your point is well taken, that it's hard to compare them if they aren't side by side. And I'll make sure that gets out to everybody in a way that you can look at it, and then at our next meeting we will we'll knock that out.
Thanks, Tom. I guess I just want to say too that, you know, in the words of Carolyn Campbell, I don't think we're that far off, you know, I just think there's like, this is like a light editing. Like to me, I see the railroad safety as being part of that corridor intersection safety improvements, you know, like totally makes sense. But if folks are thinking that that would be a really good carrot for voters, then I don't have any personal issue with, you know, breaking that out as an extra sub element. Likewise, like the technology upgrades, I think to me it would be, again, helpful to try to figure out what the name of that is, so that people have a better sense of what that is, like technology upgrades such as, you know, the Hawks and such like that. That if that kind of comes out as a speed, really just synonymous, you know, speed management and technology upgrades, maybe that's like the middle ground of how we kind of fuse these two together. So I don't know, I just wanted to toss out those ideas and see if folks are open to that.
Right. Well, we'll do that. We're going to send out what those current descriptions of the safety elements that you see here are. So because those at least are in a draft form, and we can work with those and the descriptions that that we have for the two elements that we've been talking about here in our current proposal, and wordsmith those to make sure. And I hear what you're saying, maybe as simple as just adding the words at grade railroad, safety, to one or the other of the two elements, but, you're right, that's something we need to do. All right, is everybody, okay with, that process, with that, proposal that we will, get that information out to everyone? Look at it, make sure of how you would, want to see those, sub-elements described and, organized, and we will put that together. I have, one more comment online and then a couple, here in the room. So let's start with Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions regarding the technology upgrades category, and I think I may have heard the answers in a couple responses previously, but I just wanted to clarify them. So going back, maybe Rick can respond to this, but as I heard him say, all funding for technology and new projects would be embedded in the project costs for that project. These funds would be used to upgrade existing systems or where there was a demonstrated need in the existing transportation system. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes.
Secondly, with respect to, Farhad answered this question, but I just want to clarify it about what would be eligible for funding under technology upgrades. Would that include such things as traffic management, vehicle connectivity, and emergency response? Would those be eligible funding allocations?
So again, and we can collectively expand on that definition later in the process, but anything that is considered routine operations is not eligible. If it's not routine operation, if we can define it as an enhancement, then it would be eligible.
Wouldn't by definition new technology constitute an enhancement?
Again, we have to get down into the weeds to make sure that we define it to ensure that it's eligible.
And my last question is, I think Carolyn tried to clarify this. These funds would be available for both roads and for transit. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So my observation is that the current title says technology upgrades. I think that upgrade strongly implies this notion that these funds would be used to improve existing systems. And just, I think as we communicate this to the public, we really need to make sure they understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, good. When we send out the descriptions of these individual sub-elements, we'll look carefully at that. That's a good point, Bruce.
Thank you.
All right, Dale.
A couple things. One is on the technology upgrades. We just covered most of what I was going to say, but as somebody who spent years on these committees and worked with Dick Massey and all of those years ago,
generations,
these things, there needs to be these things incorporated wherever they can be, and to the extent that this program can supplement that money that the jurisdictions are putting into upgrading those facilities on existing, not in corridor improvements, but in the existing intersection, because they are system-wide. You can say, okay, I'm going to put in a signal improvement system for 2 miles on this roadway, but what you really need to do in many cases, put that system in for the whole length of the roadway to make it work. And so how it can work in there, and to the extent that it can be done here, is I think a source of funds that's really important. The other thing I wanted to say, and I wanted to make it clear, I was trying to make a comment about earlier about particular drivers, and there's only so much we can do about particular drivers. The things that Ava and Moss were talking about are things that are, I know with working on projects, it's this ongoing discussion that needs to be done, and anything we can add, I think we should add. And I totally support what Ava and Moss were talking about. And I do not, but I did want to make it clear that I don't think in that one particular instance, I don't care what kind of roadway it was, he was going to do what he was going to do. And that was my point. And I don't want that to take away from the fact that working on the structure of the roadway, et cetera, is not something that should be considered in design. So, thank you.
Thank you. Arlen,
Yeah, two things. One is I appreciate getting the information sent out so we have it to look at. But when we're looking in this room and we're seeing just that and not the other at the same time in
I know.
comparison, I need to see it here. So I'm assuming that that direction is we see it here as well, and we can talk about it, either or, however, whatever mechanism is the best way to show it.
absolutely.
So that's one point. The second point is, and it just struck me now. I mean, most of the things that are on here, we handled the bus pullout thing that's going somewhere else. But most of these things are potentially, they are safety or within the context of the name title of the element. I just realized it says safe in the first one, safety and capacity improvements. My assumption was that those are safety improvements at intersections that may also assist with capacity as opposed to safety or capacity improvements. If it's safety or capacity improvements, the or capacity belongs someplace else. But if the projects are all safety oriented and can, just like technology has to advance something, it can't be a
Maintenance.
maintenance
Status
thing.
quo.
That we're dealing with that. And I realized that I don't know the answer.
So let me answer that. It says and capacity.
Yep, right.
So it doesn't say or, it is conditions that require the safety analysis, and capacity may be part of the solution.
Okay, so that's the key point.
Yes.
The key thing, because many of the improvements that would be made, it's interrelated. So you're going to see benefit to it. So you're going to have a safety nexus, but you'll have a capacity benefit. Roundabout is a perfect example. A roundabout by its design and definition will help improve capacity, but it's driven by safety. So you get 2-for-1 type of mentality. This is to make sure it doesn't limit, and from a delivery standpoint, then ties the hands of the jurisdictions now to only those, which could be hard to isolate.
So what we're really saying is then everything that would be in that first category has to, being that it's in a safety element, has to improve safety.
Right.
Yes.
It may also improve capacity.
Yes.
But it has.
It'll improve capacity, safety, operations, the overall performance will all benefit, but by putting it here, it's saying, come to me with a safety nexus.
Yeah. And what I'm thinking is that there may be, it may be a very small tweak. I don't want to get into wordsmith, but a very small tweak to that it's intersection safety improvements. These in the discussion or the description, these may include capacity or what was the other word you used? Operational improvements as well, but their ultimate goal, if they're in this element, they're designed to improve the safety. And I think that would be it's minor, but in actuality, it answers questions for me, and I'm sure other people.
Yeah, that was the suggestion I was going to make
think
as
Moss
well.
made it
If we
too.
just call it, and Moss did as well, intersection safety improvements.
Yeah.
Maybe a better. This is very much a holdover from
I know.
RTA 1.
Right.
And if you recall, those projects had safety elements for sure, but there were fairly significant capacity improvements that in many cases, I think, drove those projects. So this is a different time. There's I think a different focus, certainly that the committee has as far as where this money should be directed.
Thank you.
All right,
One-
go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I just, with our proposal, the June 26 proposal, we had those two named corridor projects in the larger element of corridor and intersection safety improvement, but thinking about it, I think they need to have their own line item because they are not named projects. So you had mentioned at grade railroad safety and technology upgrades, but it seems like those two should be on there since they got moved from corridor projects. They were.
Yeah.
Is that what? Okay.
Those two
Should stay.
they need to be listed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Bruce, your hand is still up. Did you have another comment?
No, I did not. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right. I would like us to move on to the next element and maybe go to active transportation. Thank you. All right, just a reminder to folks that we had originally presented this as a committee, had worked with it as greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks, along with, of course, the two projects we just mentioned that would be partially funded out of active transportation. The proposal from June from this committee was to create two differently named sub-elements. One, connectivity and compliance enhancements, and the other, dedicated infrastructure improvements. And let me read you the description of connectivity and compliance enhancements. This was split, it was 100 million, 102 million was recommended, and 51 million was projects that address gaps in the active transportation network, as well as ensuring that existing infrastructure is ADA compliant. All right, the second sub-element would be dedicated infrastructure improvements. And those are projects that reconstruct and build new active transportation facilities to improve mobility, reduce congestion, improve safety, and enhance the active transportation network. Can use funds for two named projects here. So the two named projects would fall within that description. Once again, we had information that we reviewed quite a while ago about the needs in the greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalks area, and we'll get those back out to the committee again to take a look at. The question I think at this point is, what do you want to see as far as transportation active transportation sub elements?
Chair, I mean, I would repeat those two that got moved from the corridor element or from the road element to active portion and active transportation should be on there as line items. I also wanted to say that the 102 million that was in the June 26 budget is just about the difference between 90 million and 102 is just about those two projects, the same cost that got moved over. And I think that that's only right, that if these projects are getting moved out of one category to another as named projects, then the budget should be added to, and that adds up to 102 or 3.
Yeah, 103.9.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, good point. We're not really changing the allocation here. It's in a way, it's more a question of description.
Yeah.
Describing what's included. Any Any other comments about that? As I said, I'll make sure that the descriptions of that you see here for this active transportation element are provided to everybody. And of course, the descriptions that we already have from our June proposal can be kind of laid out side by side. We can decide how to describe it
And shown here.
and show it here, of course. Yeah.
She has that correct one, so we can pull it up.
Oh, good.
So I don't know which one this was. Yeah, but if you don't mind, pull up the safety one. We discussed at the July meeting. So what you have is the two side by side.
Yeah, so it's the safety.
Yeah, so this, we have it for each element.
Okay, good. Let's go on then, Crystal, to our active transportation. Nice, okay. All right, feedback on our adopted motion is that it would increase active transportation by 12 million and create the two new sub-elements that I mentioned, connectivity and compliance.
Mr. Chair, if I recall, the purpose of the exercise was, do you want to leave those two as your sub elements instead of the previous sub elements?
Right. Dale?
I would like to kind of get an explanation of what we mean by dedicated infrastructure and structure. Is that, you know, I can think of two or three different things that dedicated could mean. How are we using it in this case?
It could mean named, right? Or it could mean at some point. Yeah, I don't know what else it could mean.
I think there's kind of just a, and you know, this could be something that just gets edited, but essentially it was more trying to delineate, like, there are connectivity and compliance issues within our active transportation network. And then there's also just like fundamental problems with it. Like, you know, you have major gaps, like you're like literal no sidewalk. Well, I guess there's like gaps and stuff like that, but it would be more like projects that are focused on building out the network and making those connections versus kind of improvement projects in areas where there might be a sidewalk, but it's insufficient, or is, you know, there's some kind of experience issue or some kind of need that has been identified for that, for a given area.
Yeah, I get it. And I think with enough wording that we would hope people would read, we could get that across. But I'm starting to think now that the RTA working group organization of it, which was 76 million, I think, or whatever the amount was, but that the idea of being able to describe it within the element will be easier using it than it would using these. But that's up to the committee to decide. Dale, did you have something?
My thought process is literally, it's all about connectivity and compliance when we come to the sidewalks and on the paths. Now, when we can, you know, to me, as somebody who has been around, you know, I think a dedicated that means that it's a roadway that's been accepted by a jurisdiction as being a dedicated road versus being a road that's not dedicated or accepted by a particular jurisdiction
Private property.
which is a private roads, and there are various natures of private roadways, and I could see confusion there. But I think by and large, the whole category is basically about connectivity and compliance. Now, we could say something about, okay, connectivity means between X amount of feet different and et cetera, and that, you know, longer projects are segregated out. And we could work on something along that line. But ultimately, we have a network, we have a map of a network, and everything we're looking at doing is adding to that map. And whether we're talking about sidewalks or whether we're talking about bicycle paths or other pathway projects, we're adding to that connectivity and compliance. You know, every time we do a street, a residential street, we have to upgrade the curb cuts. You know, I mean, that obviously is a compliance issue. But, you know, so I think it's primarily in that top line covers a description of basically the category.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so let's do this. We'll get out the description of let's call it the TMC version. And we have this other the other description of the 626-23 motion, and we will we'll decide at our next meeting which of those descriptions we're going to use. I think we're pretty well set on what the dollar amount's going to be, and we'll go from there. All right with everyone? Okay.
I have a process question. Just because of time, I think you said the city had a time certain of 12:30. It's 12:23 now. And I know we're kind of going through these one by one, but last time I think we kind of caught Suntran off guard with a lot of our questions. I see they're here in person now. Are they going to have a time within our time frame to, I mean, I don't know if you have questions. We had questions last time. They were going to come back with answers. Is that part of what we're doing here today?
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to get to.
Taking longer than we
before now.
thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, Crystal, let's go quickly to environment. Take a quick look at it and say if the way we're describing our path forward applies also to this one. So this increases the environmental element by 48 million and
adds a new.
Need, I think we need to take a look at what the needs studies showed for both of those. And then the infrastructure to improve climate change resilience and preparedness is certainly going to need more a description about how we would do that and what kinds of improvements would do.
And what would be eligible.
Yeah, and what would be eligible.
That was what I was gonna add. I mean, I see comments, well, something may not be eligible. You can write these things in a way that they'll be eligible. We just need to figure out how to do it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Carolyn, for pointing out the obvious about my schedule. Plus, well, so we're going to go forward with this one the same way we've described the other two. Get out information about how those sub-elements were described and what the needs were proposed to be within the long-range plan. And then with those descriptions, we'll work on that at our next meeting. So I would like to ask if any of the transit folks who are with us would like to make any comments or have any additional information that you might want to provide us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Rhett Crownshield. I'm the Transit Service Administrator for the City of Tucson. We appreciate your time. Oh, yeah.
Great, great. No, that's, you don't have to stand there, but maybe just grab the mic. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you for having us. We did come back with a few slides to answer your questions from the last meeting. With me today, I've got Davida Mueller, who's our Director of Service Planning from Suntran, and also Mr. Steve Spade, who's our General Manager. I did provide an electronic copy to Rio this morning regarding the slide deck that we've got, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to pass these out.
Sure.
Thank you.
Ooh, it's big font too. We all really appreciate
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I've got a copy right here. Right. Okay, so on the first slide you see here, I think you wanted a description of what was actually happening with the costing that we came up with. As relates to the first element, what we've gotten from the COA is recommended weekdays, evening frequency area expansion, including all weekdays service until at least 11 p.m. This includes increased frequency and service expansion, does not include overcrowding relief and deadhead.
Excuse me just a second. Did you provide that slide deck to Rio also?
Rio has it correct.
Okay, well, for some reason it didn't make it here. Okay. All right, we'll have it up as soon as.
Okay, I can provide Crystal with a copy as well.
I'm sending it over right now.
Like right
Okay,
now.
thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the folks online get a chance to kind of walk along with us. If you want to tackle those additional questions, that might be something we can do without actually looking at them. Or do you?
Sure.
It's up to
Yeah,
you.
we don't have to go in a specific order. We can go to that last slide.
Yeah, so you want to read those questions and kind of your responses?
Certainly. There were some concern about what is missing from the RTA next elements that are in the RTA current plan. So we've got Houghton expansion deferred projects, which is the Houghton Road to be completed after completion of Houghton Road project, Kolb extension of Route 4 to PCC East Campus. River Road extension on Route 11 to Tohono Tadai Transit Center. We've got an extension of Broadway, the Wilmot Leg to Catalina Highway. Not including current elements, we've got P48, which is Suntran marketing and customer service for Sun Shuttle. P49 Transit Express deferred project, express from Laos Transit Center to Ronstadt Transit Center at peak hour. Now related to the LRTP.
Hang on, I just had a follow-up on this one. These are things that have been essentially deferred or that we didn't have enough money for. Can you kind of describe why they were deferred? And perhaps what the plan is, or if they still have that kind of priority, now, 18 years later, that we need to do them.
Certainly. I'll have Davida speak to that specific question.
Thanks.
Thanks, Red. On the deferred items, the first one, the Houghton route, the 450 is doing a portion of it from Rita Ranch to the Pima College East Campus. However, the rest of the route is not completed all the way to Broadway. That was tied directly to the Houghton Road project, and the Houghton Road project between Golf Links and Irvington hasn't even started yet. And so that will cause operational issues, whether it's Sun Shuttle or Sun Tran, to continue the route all the way to Broadway. Cove extension of Route 4 to PCC East, that's one of the recommendations actually that came out of the COA. So it is still something that we would like to do. Currently, it is being supported by the Sun Shuttle 450. River Road extension of Route 11 to Tonal today. I am not sure if that is still a priority. It was on my list of items. We haven't even looked at it because there was no funding to be able to do that. And also the extension of Broadway all the way to Catalina Highway. There is a recommendation to change that portion from Broadway to Speedway to Udall, which is that beginning piece in our COA recommendation. Going all the way to Catalina Highway at the time that it was proposed didn't have the commercial growth and the residential growth. However, that is one of the continuing building areas of Tucson with commercial growth growing and residential growing. So I do expect that in the future that will be something that people will continue to ask for. Right now, the only route that covers that is the 109 Express, but it's in a single direction. It's not bi-directional.
I
And
think the
then,
basic question that probably drove this question here of what is missing from the RTA Next elements is these projects that have been deferred, let's say, for good reason or just haven't gotten to yet. Do you feel like those are included or money to do those projects is included in the RTA Next proposal? Or would you expect that those are high priority, within new projects to be taken on or projects to be continued, let's say, into the next 20-year period?
okay. I don't think that they're covered in, depending on which version, the alternative or the other, I don't think that they're covered in the next. I think that the 510 million, the first version, is status quo. It doesn't cover adding these 4 projects into it. And I think that the RTA Next is also missing a couple other things, not only the marketing component, but also the refurbishment and rehabilitation of the Sunlink cars and rails. So I think you'll see when we get to those slides that have dollars. And then now today in this meeting, I saw that you were moving the pullouts, which I have issues with on its own, but you were moving those to the transit budget and I don't have those in my budget. So are you going to increase the amount to incorporate those those safety elements that you're pushing to the transit budget because they're not currently included in those dollars?
And that was, I guess somebody said that was like a misnomer. It was moved to the corridor element, not to the transit element. But could I ask a question when you said deferred from RTA 1, or, I mean, was that by the transit working group under service expansion? What were these deferred from? And it sounds like is there money in the Houghton when the Houghton project does get done? Is there money in there that wouldn't need to come out of our RTA next? I guess I'm
So-
confused.
My understanding, this is a list that I inherited when I got this job, that are all the projects that were determined to be done at the beginning of RTA 2006.
Oh,
So these were identified at that time. Houghton Road project was supposed to be completed a couple of years ago. That has been deferred to RTA next and is not completed and will not be completed by the sunset of 2026. So I don't know if there's funding in the road project for this operational issue, or if it was supposed to be in the transit element, but we're not going to get to it until after 2026. So it's not currently going to be funded because it's part of the current.
Okay, just to clarify about the 510 million, we've been told that maintenance of effort is around 370 million, and that the extra 140 would be for further enhancements, which these could, I assume, be considered as, right?
So one of the issues that we looked at when we were doing the original request that the CAC asked about considering how much money we will need over the 20 years is the first RTA had an issue where where costs went up, and we anticipate, because transit's very human driven resource, that costs will continue to go up. And we also did not collect taxes for a period because of the recession we had. And so we put a very small 6% allocation growth into our calculations. And if we do that, well, we come very close to the 510 million without including any Sun Shuttle services. And Sun Shuttle is also very human resource driven. And so there's no mechanism in our 510 million or the 370 we're currently spending just on transit to account for the needs for increased people and the increased salaries that go with it. So we expect that 510 million will be very tight by the end of the 20 years, if it makes it to the 20-year horizon.
Okay, thanks. Farhad?
So a couple things as a reminder, let's talk about the expenditure and the revenue side. Again, for the purpose of comparing apples to apples, we're comparing a deflated revenue versus a cost in 2023. Over time, everybody recognizes and understands that the revenue will also increase. It may not increase at the same rate as the inflation, but that's already built into the equation. So revenue increases over time, cost will increase over time, but that's why the process is designed in a way that decisions are made on an annual basis through a budgeting process and through identifying needs when it comes to expansion and service improvements. So what you see here as defined as deferred, they're not by definition deferred. Those are opportunities that still exist and will be considered over time in the current plan and maybe in the future plan. So to answer your question, it fits the definition of area expansion. It fits the definition of service enhancements. So those to be determined in the future by the governing body as they are ready to be implemented.
And these were not promised improvements on the ballot.
No, again, the ballot is broad enough that these decisions are made over the next 20 years. Same thing will happen with the new ballot. Over the next 20 years, we shall do X, Y, and Z. And the definition, it goes back to what you said, the definition is hopefully broad enough that we can define the needs over the next 20 years.
So on that note, at least 2 of these are already recommended in our COA to continuation. The other thing that the 510 doesn't take into account is in the last 2 to 3 years. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Our costs didn't go up in very small amounts like usual costs do, 2-3%. You know, you expect to pay more for paper next year, or you expect more to pay for envelopes. We had services that our contracts went up 5, 10, and 25% in those little 3 years. So for 1 year to the next, instead of it being a 2 or 3%, which you would expect on most contracts, it jumped 8%. Another contract dropped 15%. So those kinds of costs have not settled down yet. And so that is my concern about whether or not we'll be able to meet the needs that you're asking us to meet, because we've had unprecedented cost increases. The last time we saw something like this was in the late 70s and early 80s. And yes, I'm old enough to remember 18% interest. So I just want you to be aware of that as we go forward, that cost to do business has incrementally increased at a rate that we have not seen in a very, very long time, just in the last couple of years. So that's one of, that's what we wanted to make sure was in. But the question that I was asked was, what have we not completed that was in the planned completion at the time that RTA started?
I think it would be helpful for the folks online and for us here in the committee room to have a chance to review these slides that you've provided us, and then anything else that you would want to, particularly when we're talking about kind of the long range plan. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do, and that sort of thing. So
for the long range plan, I can tell you weekend service. It's the easiest one for me to calculate. Based on today's service, not tomorrow's service or COA service, today's service, that mid-range phase 1 item was to make weekend service equivalent to weekday service. That alone is $515 million, 772,753, give or take. That is an increase of over 40% of the COA recommendations for increased frequency and service, which just gets our service to 10 p.m. And it doesn't discuss any other increases. So all the other increases require infrastructure, capital improvements, bridges, signalization. And so those were very difficult for me to calculate. But the one that I could give you, which most people request very often, is matching weekend service to weekday service. So that's $515 million all by itself. So other capital needs that we will need if we provide that type of service would include vehicles. We have signalization issues where the bus is trying to make a left turn. There's no left turn arrow. The signal, if we want to ever go to signal priority for a bus, that's not included. That was one of the recommendations in the long range regional plan. And then bus stop amenities, making sure that every bus stop in the system, there's over 2,200 bus stops, have shelters and other amenities. And shelters alone, each bus stop, counting concrete and trash can and lighting, and is estimated today to be about $35,000 per bus stop.
all right. Well,
Not counting right away.
okay, thank you very much for providing this. Could I ask if maybe the committee, including those online, could read these over the next couple of weeks, and at our next meeting, if you wouldn't mind coming again. I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions, and we'll have a little more time for you also to give us some details about this.
Okay, I would like to make one point on the last column, because I don't know Sun Shuttle's costs. what I did was I took SunTrans costs and what was recommended and took a amount between the delta and added it to the COA cost. So it's a guess on my part, having the Sun Shuttle cost being, next to the COA, because they also had COA recommendations for increased service. So that last column is very much a guess on my part for the Sun Shuttle service.
Okay, good.
It's fairly approximate, so we can dial it in when we have the calculation itself.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
That,
you. Thank
that
you.
was
Thank
good.
you.
And thanks for this information. Yeah, I said, I know we kind of caught you off guard last time so thanks for being so thorough and hopefully we'll see you again.
Before we dismiss them, I am having a hard time understanding this chart. Can you guys just explain to us what these columns actually mean?
The second page?
The beautiful
Colored one?
colorful one that we have up right now.
So the first one. The first three columns are copy of what was in the last meeting
Okay,
from this
us.
body.
Okay,
So I couldn't make the yellow look identical to the copy that I was given.
Okay.
And then the final two copies on the right, one is taking today's SunTrans service and adding the COA recommendations without removing any service. So we've to cover that. So that is what that $1.1 billion is. And then the final one was what I just mentioned, was trying to bring in the Sun Shuttle amount, and it brings it up to $1,409 million or $1.4 billion.
okay, so just to make, so I'm gonna ignore the last column because we're not sure about that.
Right.
But, so what we proposed as a committee is that we put $691.2 million towards transit. And you're telling us that your full-scale service of everything cost would actually be
Twice that much.
1,143. Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you.
All right, good. Thank you. Let's finally get to Sam Credio and with his
Stay here as long as we need.
yes, we will. He probably has something to do other than this. Thanks, Sam, for sticking around. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. At the last RTA board meeting, Mayor Romero asked that I come and present to the CAC a similar presentation that I gave to the mayor and council last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, regarding the city's approach to RTA Next. It's just a verbal presentation. I don't have any fancy slides or anything like that. The material that I'll be covering today is available on the city's website for the study session material for mayor and council from the last meeting. What I'd like to begin with is tell you what the direction was we received from mayor and council at our August 22nd mayor and council meeting. And they directed the city manager and myself to develop a prioritized project list based on the city's estimated allocation of sales tax generated by the RTA Next plan. And in doing so, we had to take a look at a few things. First of all, in order to develop a prioritized project list, we took a look at our Move Tucson plan framework, and that's what we used to help guide us as we prepared this prioritized list. In order to come up with a holistic prioritized list, we did have to develop a target investment amount. And so in order to do so, we first began with the RTA board approved budget of $2.34 billion. That is based on the RTA's pessimistic 2022 revenue projection. We then excluded the 4 RTA projects that were deferred by the RTA board and then used an assumed revenue share of approximately 65% as our target investment, which resulted in $1.37 billion to be used in developing a prioritized project list. Now, it's worth noting that that 65% revenue share assumption is based on tax revenue collection in the region over the last several years. And again, it was just a target investment that we're using for this exercise. And obviously the percentage and the amounts are subject to adjustment.
So Sam, just
Yes.
to clarify that, that's your estimate of the amount of sales tax revenue collected by vendors in the city limits.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. That was our assumed revenue allocation or revenue share generated by the city of Tucson.
Okay, so
Correct.
yeah, generated within city limits essentially.
That's correct.
What's the current kind of bookend of that based on population? What's the difference in population? Still somewhere around 55%?
Yeah, so it's about 55% population of the region. That's correct.
All right, yeah, just to give folks here kind of an idea of the different ways that have been talked about in the past by others.
That's correct. Thank you. We're going to use and we're in progress right now, taking that target investment and then developing a prioritized project list. And what we're ultimately going to present to mayor and council is a project list that includes all the needs of the city and city of Tucson. The way that we are approaching this is as follows. So we have several elements, and I'll run through these really quickly. First is location-specific projects. And so that's very close to the RTA's multimodal corridor projects. We're assuming about 35% of our project list will be location-specific projects. The next item, which is timely because we were just talking about that, is public transportation improvement projects or transit operations. We're currently targeting about 36% of our investment for transit projects. And the significance of that 36% is that it reflects the investment that was identified as part of Move Tucson in our mobility master plan, that we invest about 36% in transit service. We then included a new category called arterial capital pavement reconstruction. And we are estimating about 14.5% for arterial capital pavement reconstruction. And for this category, we recommend setting aside money for Tucson's federally classified principal arterial streets. So for example, Speedway. And the idea is that these principal arterial streets, they carry the most volume. They also represent a regional mobility function. In fact, when you look at the map, some of these streets actually traverse in and out of the city limits into the county, in unincorporated Pima County. We then have an element called pedestrian and bicycle safety and walkability improvements, which is going to represent about 7.5% of the investment. And that will include the projects that you would expect to see in this category, such as Hawks, bike boulevards, and pedestrian improvement projects. We do recommend setting aside about half of the funds in that category for named projects, such as the Igo Gala Bike Boulevard, but then also reserving the remaining half of those funds for future projects eligible under this category, thereby giving us flexibility in future needs. And then last but not least, we certainly have traffic signal technology upgrades. And so category will actually allow us to improve about half of the traffic signals in the city limits. It's complementary to the investment we're making under Prop 411 Safe Streets. And so together, both funding sources would complete all of the, improve all the signalized traffic intersections, signalized intersections in the city. That represents about a 2% share of the revenue. Lastly, if you add all those up, you're probably not going to get 100% for a couple of reasons. One is rounding, but the other is that we do plan to set aside about 5% of the revenue allocation for administrative costs. We're continuing to use the same number that's in the current RTA Next framework of 110 million. So that's roughly about $71.5 million for administrative costs. And so you add all those up, and that is going to reflect the $1.37 billion plan. We do expect that our list will actually exceed the $1.37 billion for a couple of reasons. Is that while we know there is certainly a possibility for there to be inflation or even a recession over those 20 years, but the opposite could happen. There could also be a good economy and those revenue projections could come in higher. And so the city of Tucson plans to have a plan ready to go if there's an opportunity to have alternate projects that could be ready if there is additional revenue available some future point down the road. So that is the presentation we gave to Mayor and Council a couple weeks ago. We are working on that prioritized project list, and I do expect in the near future we will present that to Mayor and Council for their feedback and direction. With me today, I have Patrick Hartley, and together we'd be able to answer any questions you might have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sam. Just a basic question. Has the council directed you at this time to take this forward to the other jurisdictions, say within the technical management committee, to
Unknown caller.
take that as a suggested change in this? What's the next step as far as taking this to the RTA board?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a great question. They have not given us direction in terms of presenting to the other jurisdictions other than the mayor's request to present to the CAC today. As I mentioned, we have not received final direction from mayor and council on a prioritized project list. I expect at that time we will receive direction on which committees to take that prioritized project list. But I do envision that it would be not only presenting to this group, but also to the technical management committee.
Thanks. Carolyn?
Thank you, Sam. Just a couple of questions. You're talking about the 7.5% for pedestrian and bicycle, half of that for named projects. But then you also have 35% for location specific. Are you saying that that's going to be half of it's going to be included up there, or is the location specific only roads?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Carolyn, that's a great question. I apologize for that confusion. No, location specific projects are going to be for the projects that have a defined scope, a defined project limits, and a defined project budget. What we expect in that pedestrian and bicycle category is that about half of that 7.5% allocation will be for projects that have been identified as, for example, I used a bike boulevard. So we may assign some dollar amounts to it, but what we want to do is provide the voters with an idea of how those dollars might get spent. They would be separate and distinct from the location specific projects.
But you would see it on the ballot, in your view.
We haven't got that far. You'll see it on the prioritized project list within that category. Similar to how you saw earlier, we've got two projects under the safety and active modes. We envision it'd be similar to that.
Okay, thanks. And then one other question. I assume that none of the current bicycle boulevards are federalized roads, federalized projects, and your bike boulevards are in awful shape. And is that something in 411 that you're going to be doing? Because some of them are kind of like neighborhood streets. So I don't know if they fall on any list, but they're really in bad shape.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Mr. Chair, Carolyn. So Prop 411, Better Streets, is going to improve the pavement on all of the neighborhood streets in the city limits throughout the next 10 years. We are working with our Independent Oversight Accountability Commission to prioritize bike boulevards. And in fact, they've already done so in the first few years of the program on specifically for Prop 407 bike boulevards that are ready to go. So no, we don't envision that the bike boulevard projects specifically will include pavement, because likely they already run through a neighborhood which would be covered under Prop 411.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Go ahead, Dale.
And her question, just as a member of the, we have been prioritizing even before this, the bike boulevards for like 5 or 6 years, and it's been an ongoing prioritization, but it's a long list, like everything that involves residential streets, so. But every time we see a project, we try to look at it and it's looked at independently. If there's something we can do with this project. Okay, that issue. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make two more points of clarification. I failed to mention that our transit projects are, we envision those are going to be our highest priority projects because they are going to represent the continuation of services currently funded through the current RTA plan. We are going to propose some funding for expansion of service for weekends, evenings, and frequency improvements. The high capacity project is actually included in our location specific projects. I do want to call out that distinction. And then lastly, I mentioned a little bit about the capital pavement reconstruction element. I do want to note that that does not include any funding for regular maintenance. That is specifically for the reconstruction of principal arterials, federally classified principal arterials.
So, what we've been classifying as capital maintenance, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Appreciate you being here. I'm sure over the next few months, there will be a lot more conversation about this
Now December,
between now and
beginning of December.
Well, sorry. I think we're gonna have to close the meeting. My voice just decided to stop.
Oh, okay.
That's convenient.
Set up.
All right, because we've lost quorum and we've reached the end of our agenda, we are now adjourned.
Good meeting. I think your voice was like working with you on it.